Hello, everybody. You're listening to the Big Chill Podcast. This is episode 540, the Darren Tulett interview. Big Chillians, and welcome back to the Big Chill Podcast. I'm Frank, joined as always with Eddie. Eddie, how's it going?
Yeah, things are going well. I guess maybe have to apologize slightly to listeners for the audio quality of our last episode. There was a recording mix-up, so my voice didn't have its usual full tone. It sounded a little bit echoey and distant. And hopefully this time it's raining here. You won't have the pitter-patter of rain adding to the
Eddie, I feel like you've been distant a lot lately.
It's true. I think I'm just distant in general, just my personality.
Well, I mean, you might have some distance from America, Eddie, but I know you, for one, are very excited for Major League Baseball's opening day today. Have you been streaming as many games as possible?
No. I mean, I do. Over the course of a regular season, I probably watch 10 baseball games. That doesn't include being in a bar and they happen to be on in the background, because that's kind of cheating. Yeah. Because if I factor that in, I'll total quite a few by the end of the season. But just actually either being at home or being somewhere where I think, you know what, I'll put a baseball game on in the background, but intentionally on in the background. It happens rarely. Maybe I'll throw one on tonight. You never know.
Well, I mean, I have to say, the season's pretty much just started. Games are just starting, and New York is still New York. The Mets, for as hopeful as they are every season, and as more and more money they pour in, they did a very Mets-like thing and put Justin Verlander on the IL opening day already. So good start for their new signing there. Whereas the Yankees are surviving off the long ball with Aaron Judge homering on his first at bat. So some things never change in New York baseball.
No, but it is kind of indicative, right? It will be interesting to see how the pitch clock impacts home run numbers. Who gets hurt by that more? Whether it forces pitchers to just throw more pitches that maybe they would have avoided otherwise, or whether the kind of faster sequence makes it more difficult for hitters to be set. Like, that will be the one thing that's interesting to track over the opening weeks and months of the season.
Yeah, and that's Judge's first home run as Yankees captain. A long list of historic Yankee captains.
I don't even know what a captain really does in baseball.
He captains the team, Eddie.
It feels like
he leads the ship. What do you mean?
You know my theory that I think you could take pretty much anyone and they could instantly be a manager of a baseball.
You think you can captain a team?
Well, captain would be harder because you'd at least have to justify your presence on the roster. I could manage any baseball. I think it would be indistinguishable between me and any Major League Baseball manager. Captaining.
I love this.
I mean, but it's just true. I mean, my theory. It was 2 years ago where I had advocated for Sam going and becoming a manager of a Major League Baseball team, and he didn't even know the basic rules of baseball. So that might have been a slight issue. But I at least know I don't get what you do. The lineups kind of vary slightly from day to day, and you just need to manage your pitching rotations and decide when you bring in a relief pitcher. It's not exactly like Einstein level tactical intricacies, is it?
No, but I mean, I think you could argue a decent amount of different sports, the managers or coaches that they have don't really do much.
Oh, I mean, baseball is by far and away the bottom of the totem pole. Like, I mean, genuinely, I mean this. I know I have a lot of I could do that easily claims. I really mean I think most people could be baseball managers. The only thing that would be your hindrance is your players not accepting you. So, like, the lack of credibility is the only thing that could be a real issue. But if you could somehow bypass in that, like, if you could have we'll probably discuss this later on, like the Ted Lasso They couldn't make Ted Lasso about baseball because the guy would just instantly be perfectly knowledgeable about the sport.
He even has the Don Mattingly mustache. Yeah, I mean, how serious can a manager be if they can get kicked out of a game and then just show up with funny glasses and a fake mustache, and everyone thinks it's still fine?
Yeah, I
That
mean,
shows you the level of seriousness to being a baseball manager.
already just one of your responsibilities being like sticking up for your players and intentionally getting thrown out from time to time seems kind of stupid to me. The wearing of the uniform during a game is insane.
I
Had
don't
it
know
not
if you'd
moved,
excel at that part though, Eddie. The not the uniform
getting
part, the getting thrown out part. I feel like
oh,
you'd be too polite in
I
your
wouldn't be comfortable. I wouldn't be comfortable with
no
getting an inch away from an umpire's face and
and
screaming at him.
screaming at him.
I couldn't. I agree with
Yeah,
you. I couldn't do that.
no. I mean, maybe you could picture he's French and he's pummeling you. That's happened a lot of times. So maybe that
I could do like
you could use
that
that
one
fuel.
the one guy who lost his mind and did the like army crawl towards second base and then toss
Yeah,
the toss the chalk bag and stuff. I could probably maybe get myself to do that just to amuse people, but
if
the
the
actual
wires
anger,
break.
yeah. But no,
I
the
wonder if that guy even remembers that. I wonder
oh,
if
if
that's
you
just like a 10-minute blank in his memory.
just
He just
full red mist,
yes.
yeah, it's possible. But maybe before we do get on to a little quick Ted Lasso recap, obviously it's worth mentioning we have an interview coming up, sort of 20, 30 minutes into this episode, with
Yeah.
broadcaster and journalist Darren Tulett, a really interesting look at his career, carving out this really unique position as a kind of British broadcaster on French television, which is somewhat unusual.
The Austin
And
Powers of French television, you could say.
yes, and also just later on talking about some of his favorite sports to cover and some of the kind of standout sports that he's been a part of, and also a little bit of a discussion about PSG and Liga as a whole. So a really great interview, worth sticking around for. Obviously, if you want to skip ahead to the interview, we'll never say you can't, but we'd prefer you do hang around for the little
What we say
preamble.
don't.
Yeah, exactly. And if you are a new listener, make sure to subscribe and also follow the Big Chill podcast on Instagram or Twitter. And there we go. There's our little sales pitch.
All right, to the interview. I was kidding.
But a slow sports week, has to be said. Obviously, the international break coming towards an end. Uh, One very notable result, I guess we should just mention, was
I was going to ask you.
Scotland. Scotland's big win against Spain. Aside from that, it was a few days of international football where most of the results kind of went to form and expectation. But that was probably the big surprise of the week, and a result that puts Scotland on course to qualify for the next Euros. Certainly, a very strong position, having now won their opening two matches.
Yeah, crazy. I mean, I think they had broken some streak that Spain had. It was kind of a like fake
It
stat
was,
that
yeah.
angers you. And I tried to put it in my back pocket and bring it out, but then I couldn't even remember the stat. It was like home qualifying Euro matches or something
No,
like
no.
that.
If they played in Scotland, but it was something. I think it was 19. It was either 17 or 19 European qualifiers
There
unbeaten.
you go. Okay, just not the
So
home part.
yeah, which is impressive. But given the fact that there's a World Cup qualification period that goes on in between,
And there's
and
actual Euros.
yes, neither of which particularly well for Spain. So it's
No.
not like they've been flying high. This is not the Spain of 2010 that Scotland just beat, but it's still a very notable result. And they also they outplayed Spain, which I think is the more taking aspect of it. You could have told me going into the match that they would have managed to kind of, get a couple of goals against the run of play and, sneak a result, but they genuinely were the better team on the night. And deserve that win. So we'll see if they can carry that forward. It would be very Scottish of them now to somehow still not qualify, having got off to this incredibly good start, but they are in an incredibly strong position.
Yeah, I was interested to see your opinion on it. I mean, I know you have been pretty dismissive of Scotland's football club over the years.
Well, I'm not dismissive. I mean, the other thing too,
Well,
Scott
if you want me to go back to that episode
oh, in the
where
Euros.
you berated all the Scottish supporters for how pathetic they think this victory, even though it wasn't a victory,
the
was.
draw, the draw
Yeah,
against England in the Euros.
which
Yeah.
is a victory to them and their greatest achievement ever. I think were some of the
No, I don't
sentiments
think
you shouted out there.
greatest achievement for a while, perhaps not greatest achievement ever. But yeah, I mean, look, I'm sometimes a little bit dismissive of the Scotland national team. I'm also slightly dismissive at times of Scott McTominay, who scored both of the goals against Spain, also scored 2 goals in their win against Malta on Saturday. So I think he'd scored 3 goals up until that point for Scotland. So sort of, more than doubled his tally in the space of 4 days. But, he's often one of those players who, I mean, I think a lot of people think Manchester United should move on for him. I don't think that performance changes people's mind, but it certainly shows his potential in the sense that he was man of the match and really ran the show a bit for Scotland against Spain. And, the midfield is going to be the hardest area of the pitch to boss against Spain. So it was an impressive performance.
And overall, so far, what do you think of England's 2 matches? 6 points.
Yeah,
I mean, can't complain too much.
no, as I said on the last episode, going to Italy and winning is, you can't turn your nose up at that. It's a big win, and it's, the accusations that have been leveled at this England team over the past couple of years, in spite of their good tournament performances, have been that they come unstuck against the very best opposition. I don't think Italy are, among the very elite nations in the world, even though they are reigning European champions, but they're still a good team, and going to Italy and winning is no mean feat. So, that's you kind of have to add that result as kind of sign of where England are as a team, and they handled their business nicely against Ukraine. Qualification basically is done. It would take something remarkable for them to not qualify at this point. So that's all you could have asked for 2 matches in.
And I guess moving to the NFL, not much updates there. Pretty much everyone is waiting for the draft. But we discussed Lamar Jackson and his possible moves, requesting a trade. If you could understand, that's what he was trying to say in his tweet. But there was a tweet that followed a few days later by Asante Samuel. I don't know if you saw this. So there's speculation that Lamar Jackson might be traded to the Patriots. And there's a lot of Patriot fans that are very willing to give up on Mac Jones to get Lamar Jackson. And Asante Samuel, who played for the Pats from 2003 to 2007, so 2 Super Bowl wins. I mean, do you think you'd be happy? He said, Lamar Jackson, my brother, trust me, you don't want to play for Belichick. So pretty strong words coming from someone who got 2 rings while playing for 4 years in New England.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the tough thing with Belichick, right? There's those players who speak about how difficult how difficult life is under him, but then love him forever. You'd put, Gronk into that category, Edelman into that category. I think fundamentally you even put Tom Brady into that category, although they had the slight falling out towards the end of his time in New England. And then you have the players who absolutely hated it during it and absolutely hated it afterwards. And I don't know. It feels like you have to be more appreciative of his brilliance and consistency and maybe what he did for your career. Like I don't want to be someone who justifies bosses being bad bosses because they deliver great results. Like it's not The Devil Wears Prada or something where you can just be an incredibly difficult human being, but as long as you're kind of a superstar, it's okay. But I mean, I don't think Belichick, he doesn't come across as a mean person. He just maybe isn't necessarily the most approachable and friendliest. But I don't know. I would happily play. I mean, I don't know if you're Lamar Jackson now. I don't know if it's my number one landing spot because I don't think the Patriots are primed to win a Super Bowl, and they're in an incredibly tough division. That would be my only concern.
Yeah. Well, I also don't know if you saw Robert Kraft had a statement. He said, Meek Mill is my friend. He texted me saying Lamar Jackson wanted to come here, but that's Bill's decision. Why
Is
on
that a?
earth do you say that?
I mean, you know my thoughts on Robert Kraft. I've got issues with Robert Kraft because he's one of those guys who always wears sneakers with suits, and when you're a 80-year-old white guy, it's just
Getting happy
you know.
endings at a massage in shoes, in
Yeah,
Nikes.
I mean, in fairness, maybe that's why he wears them. Maybe like, although I guess it's probably easier to clean.
Wait. Why? Why does
Well,
that help?
I was trying to think where is it easier to clean the oils and bodily fluids off of, but it's probably easier to get it off of a leather shoe than it is a sneaker.
No, he has like that protection spray he puts on his sneakers. So like when it rains, it just like splashes off.
Splashes off. He's got a pool of oil and other things at his feet.
Yeah. But nothing like an 80-year-old billionaire trying to sound cool.
Yes.
I'm sure Meek Mill is really his friend. They
And
hang
I'm
out
sure
on the reg.
once Lamar Jackson heard that, he is where can I sign?
Yeah.
But I guess the only other NFL news, right, is it looks like a sale of the Washington Commanders might be imminent.
Yeah.
For $6 billion to an investment group fronted, at least as a kind of from an image perspective, by Magic Johnson, who I don't know how this guy, I'm sure he's incredibly charismatic, and everyone, why wouldn't you want Magic Johnson to kind of be in on your business deal for a small percentage just so you get to hang out with Magic Johnson? But when you listen to him talk, he doesn't blow me away even from a basketball perspective. He says the most banal things possible. But I guess if you're a Washington Commanders fan, the chance to move on from the Dan Snyder experience is a good one. But every new ownership group kind of scares me. So I'm not sure people are delighted about this. I'd still be worried.
I mean, you say Magic Johnson isn't charismatic, but he has quite a few awkward ass interviews out there where he says some pretty upfront stuff about the type of person he was back in the day.
Oh no, well, I mean,
it
kind
seemed like he had good success during his
no,
playing
no.
career.
I said he is charismatic. It's just
I know.
that, yeah. But no, it's be interesting to see. What will interest me the most is if they change the name, if they buy them, like because the Commanders sucks as a team name, and is this an opportunity to completely rebrand the team under a new ownership group? That would be. I mean, I hope they just go back to the Washington football team because that was way better than the Commanders.
I don't think that's going to happen. They just probably spent millions of dollars getting the Commanders stuff out there.
That's not their money. They don't care about what was spent. But I mean, the reason why I don't think they would go back to the Washington football team is if you're going for the rebrand, that's not a real rebrand. It's going back to something that was under Dan Snyder. Whereas I could see them trying to think of something completely new to kind of almost physically turn the figurative new page on the organization. But yeah, on that note, before we get to the interview, should we do a quick TV recap with just Ted Lasso to maybe briefly discuss as a little mini then transition into our European football discussion with Darren Tulett?
Yeah, and actually, before we get to Ted Lasso, the other television I want to mention was we did have Tobias Doors on as a guest, probably about a year ago now, right? And during that time, he was on the Food Network Tournament of Champions and made it all the way to the Final Four. And this year, he was the 1 seed coming out of the East. And unfortunately, he lost in the second round this year.
March Madness.
A 2-point loss, I think. Very close. It was disappointing because I think he did have the better dish, and he kind of got knocked down on some things that were a little unfair. But he says he'll be back, and I'm sure he'll be back. So hopefully, maybe we can get him on again and see how he felt about an early exit as the number 1 seed.
It's how you increase the myth. Now you have something to prove when you come back the third time. Yeah, and I have a quick television catch up to do. I have, up until now, not watched any episodes of season 3 of The Mandalorian. I have
Oh
now
boy.
watched 2
Oh boy.
episodes. Not great. I don't think we have to discuss it in any great detail. One thing that stood out to me as a proud member of the Big Head Brigade, perhaps also literally and figuratively, the fact that the Mandalorians, they had that little weird baptism kind of event for the new kids being inducted as Mandalorians. The fact that they
Spoiler
give
alert.
them, yeah, it's not a real spoiler, but the fact that they give them a helmet when they must be 12 or 13 years old and they're supposed to never take that thing off and that helmet's supposed to last them their entire lives. I would have,
No,
I would have
they
been,
upgrade them.
are you sure?
Yeah, they do. They definitely do.
Where have you seen that?
What? It's been like discussed that they'll give you like new helmets as you age. It's kind of like if you've seen the episodes where like they replace the armor with new armor when you have achievements, basically. So they do replace the
Okay.
helmets.
I'm sure that they do. And I'm sure if we went to the canon, they probably maybe discuss this. In the TV show, they have never mentioned this fact.
No, they don't.
And I'm just saying I would have died when I was like 17. I would have just suffocated in my own helmet. I would have been like a hermit crab that can't find a new shell. And that would have been the end of me.
Oh man. Yeah, there are now 5 episodes of The Mandalorian, and I can tell you right now, does not get any better.
Doesn't surprise me. It does not surprise me. Oh yeah. Anyway, on to Ted Lasso, season 3, episode 3. So spoiler alert. If you haven't watched it, skip ahead 10 minutes, and then you'll get to the interview. That's probably the easiest way to do it. But it wasn't the worst episode of the season so far. Obviously, the 2 big storylines of the episode, you have the arrival of this new Zlatan-esque superstar who immediately becomes an absolute goal machine for AFC Richmond and
Unreal.
sees them shoot up the table.
Has a goal of the year every match.
Yeah, first kick of the game, first kick of his AFC Richmond career, he scores from the halfway line straight from kickoff. Has a scorpion kick, a bicycle kick at Old Trafford. Just an incredible
bicycle kick off a corner too.
Yeah, very difficult to get the space necessary to do that. Quite impressive. But yeah, no.
He had a header off a corner where he got 13 feet off the ground.
Yes. Well, he's quite tall. So there's that storyline, and then the other big storyline being the fact that there is a gay member of the AFC Richmond team. Now,
I know you have thoughts. As soon as you texted me and you said, not sure about this episode of Ted Lasso, or not sure that we talked about it.
No. Yeah, yes, please. Don't make me sound like that.
Sorry.
No. I said not sure we can discuss.
If we talk about it. Yes. And I instantly, when that first scene happened, I went, uh-oh, I think Eddie's going to have thoughts about this.
And here are my thoughts. I think it's great that the show has chosen to have a gay member of the team. And I think that's actually a really interesting storyline, given the fact that there's been no openly gay Premier League players at any point. The fact that it's been a huge topic of discussion, that about how well could someone be accepted. There's a history in English football of negative chants, obviously, and homophobic chants. So I think that's an interesting storyline. The thing that bothers me
before you get to that, I want to say I didn't know you'd have thoughts about it because like you're against it or anything like that.
Yeah, okay.
But I'm trying to make sure people I'm saying.
I think people know. The more you
never know. I might have new listeners who just think you're an asshole.
Well, no. So far, it's making you make me seem like an asshole. My own words are trying to express my own feelings.
Yeah.
But, so I wanted to say, I think that as a concept is great. The thing that bothers me is it feels like the writers of Ted Lasso have made a list of like every sensitive topic they need to include over the course of this TV show, from mental health to homosexuality to some racial issues to controversial sponsorship to controversial ownership. Like they're just running through the list. And I just wish they had been more selective just because I think they could have made each, if they whittled down those storylines from basically the 7 or 8 that they will end up covering over the course of these 3 seasons to 2 or 3, say one a season that you really focus on, I think they would have made those storylines more powerful. And instead, it just feels like, here we go again. We're going to have 2 or 3 episodes. Because to a certain degree, I almost forget about some of the topics they've covered because, like the ownership issue with the kind of African dictator and the
Yep.
oil issue. Like, you kind of forget that even happened because they had to move on to the next issue so quickly. That's the thing that bothers me about it.
Yeah, no, I exactly the same thing. You know, I appreciate that they're trying to introduce these controversial topics, but to introduce it randomly in the opener of episode 3 of season 3, and then it'll probably just be sprinkled in periodically, and it will be such a small, and I mean, not to be mean, but an insignificant part of the overall Ted Lasso story, where you could expand the focus and make that, a major theme throughout the episodes, would do it much more justice. And I completely agree. I thought this was another, like, almost exactly what you said, that they had a list of all these, topics they wanted to make sure they covered. And it was like, all right, we're at episode 3. Have we done this one yet? No, let's do that. Okay, check. Like, what's a random character that we really haven't had say a line yet in 3
Awesome.
seasons? Okay, check. Like that, it seemed rushed and not well thought out.
Yeah, that's the other issue. Is it kind of feels the way of bringing each character to the forefront is through some, I don't want to say controversial in the sense that being gay is controversial, but if you see what I mean, like the little kind of controversial storylines are the things that then put someone front and center, and that, yeah, just, it seems like they could have done a better job. Like, why are we spending any time on Kaylee building her company? Instead, have all of that time focused on a really interesting idea of how could an openly, or at this moment not openly gay, but someone who I assume over the course of the season will probably reveal this side of himself to some of his teammates. And you had things like the homophobic jokes by the AFC Richmond players. I thought that was really interesting because it did not seem up until now like this would have been a group of people who would have made homophobic jokes. And this is another part of the thing that bothers me. That seemed so out of character with how that group had interacted with each other until they then had to introduce a gay character. Therefore, they had to kind of force a little bit of homophobic joking into the locker room. Up until
Yeah.
that moment, we hadn't had any. Like, how great would it have been if we'd had 2 seasons of the occasional stereotypical locker room, changing room homophobic remark, and gradually learned this about this person? Like, you could have had this as a slow build, slow reveal, and we would have felt so much more invested then in the storyline. And instead, it's just shoved down our throats over the course of one episode.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that in general right now is kind of what is dampening my feeling about Ted Lasso. Is there's just so much going on. Like, for instance, why is this new character Keely's friend? Why are we really wasting stuff with that? Like, again, you could have more focused on that player and spent more time with that player than having an introduction of a character that's just like a floozy ditz.
Well,
Like,
also, it feels to me, I'll stick my neck out here and make a prediction. Like, I feel like I can see what's coming with her, right? Which is she's going to kind of backstab Kaylee because she's only interested in her own, you know, self promotion and progress. And Kaylee's going to realize that she can't just
Keely.
hand Keely, sorry, going to realize that she can't just hand jobs to her friends. Like, all of it just, it's just not particularly interesting as
Yeah.
a, but it's a way, again, it just feels like,
I mean, like this episode, you had so much going on, right? Like, you had that storyline that looks like it may be developing. I agree with you. I think that's you had the opening of the restaurant. You had Zava or Zaha, or whatever. What's his name?
uh, Zava,
Zava.
I think.
Zava
Yeah,
coming in.
Zava.
You had Ted Lasso having like a half mental breakdown because he finds out about his wife and their ex therapist. You have
Marriage
the
counselor.
marriage counselor. You have the player who's found out to be gay, although not openly yet. but you have like 8 different storylines going through in a 40-minute episode.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's a lot, and yeah, and multiple, and the potential pregnancy of one of the main characters,
Yeah,
and ongoing relationship drama. Like, it's every 2 minutes they're hitting you with a different, seemingly significant storyline, and it's
yeah,
a little bit overwhelming. And again, as I said, I think if you're then going to try and have meaningful social commentary, which having a gay professional Premier League, well, gay Premier League player, I guess no need to add in professional there. This you undo the significance of that social commentary by having 9 simultaneous storylines.
yeah. And they had, like, again, they do have some really funny jokes, and there are times where I really laugh and I really like it, and then there are other times where they're, I think for me, it's they're trying to be too witty sometimes, and at the same time be like too dumb funny. Like, you can't do both. You can't have Ted Lasso making jokes about actors that no one in the 21st century is going to know who they're talking about, and like have them go around the room, and like discuss the actors' best movies and stuff like that, which was funny, but I'm sure a lot of people didn't get it. And then the other end of the spectrum, have a scene where they're all meditating around Zava, and like Jamie Tart walks in and like walks out. Like, you can't
Which
be
was
so
decent.
dumb and try and be so witty. Like, you gotta kind of skate one way or the other.
And I want to say, as a positive, I actually think that Jamie Tart character development has been really good. I actually
Yeah,
find him to be more interesting and funnier, and kind of, in a sense, the kind of, it seems as if he's aware of the farcical nature of some things, which is
yeah, he had some
interesting.
good jokes.
Yeah. I will also add it to your references that just don't make sense to me. I cannot remember the name of the, Daniel, the Mexican footballer. Is his name Daniel?
Yeah,
He,
Danny
when they,
Ross.
yeah, Danny, when they are making in the period in which they're making the kind of homophobic jokes, he makes a Norm Macdonald reference. And which is immediately accepted and acknowledged by all the other players. I think you could walk into every Premier League dressing room right now, offer £100 million to anyone who knows who Norm Macdonald is, and it would be no one. I mean, it's such a, not only is it culturally specific really to North America, but it's also then specific to a very type of person within North America. So that just bothered me. And my final note on the episode, I get why he gives away the book of matches, because it plays into the premonition from the psychic.
Yeah.
However, he hands out these book of matches, and people treat them as if he is handing them pure gold.
Well, that was the other question. Like, why is he handing out matchboxes? Like, who does that anymore?
No, I mean, it's the kind of thing you maybe have as you exit the restaurant in case you need them. But having that be the, like, I hope this helps you to remember this evening. Oh, thanks. I'll toss this in that drawer that I have
Yeah.
just in case I ever need matches in the future. Like, this is in case the power ever goes out and I've got a few candles lying around. I'll think of your restaurant.
And he was so excited that he had gotten them. Like, that was the other thing too. It's like, oh my God, you got them.
Yes.
It was like, oh, what is it? Oh, they're matches?
No, I expected them to be like a pin or some piece of jewelry or something significant. It's like,
Is that where we're going wrong? If we just start doing the Big Chill podcast matches, are we just going to go through the roof?
We'd get Premier League footballers immediately on board. If that's the swag we sent out, Big Chill matches. Yeah.
So yeah, again, like, I'm enjoying the episodes, and there are some times where I think it's really funny, but it does seem too densely packed in, and they're trying to rip through too many storylines, and I think that's taking away from the fun of the show a little bit, which season 1 was there was so much less going on, and it was able to be more funny. The only other issue I had that I want to talk to you about, in what Premier League club does the former best player, but clearly second best player on the team, all of a sudden go to an assistant coach, I want to be the best, and the assistant coach goes, well, I'll train you.
Oh, yeah. Well, they hadn't, I mean, in fairness,
What
based
is
on
this,
the World
Rocky?
in fairness, based in the world they live in, they don't appear to do much training. So this might just be the idea of like, oh no, we're going to start training.
Yeah.
Oh,
This sounds
okay.
like a Mighty Ducks plot line. Like, I want to
It's
be
not
the best. Well, we'll start training because you're a professional footballer and you're not training. Like, what?
also the person when you're a, attacking player with tons of flair and you're now being outshone by another attacking player with tons of flair who's scoring spectacular goals. The person you want to train you is the hard-nosed central midfielder, so I mean, what are
Or
we going to
maybe
see?
he's going to add that to his toolkit.
Some crunching tackles, and he's just going to
Yep.
be maybe he's going to be the all-round player from now on.
Yeah.
And I guess that might be he might transition into being a midfielder. I mean, that's might be the way, and then he shines through that. So maybe what I'm saying is both stupid and smart, but yeah, it was a bit silly.
Yeah. But I still think Roy Keane is kind of holding this show on his shoulders.
You mean Roy Kent?
Roy Kent. No, Roy Keane. He loves the show so much. He holds the television.
I
on his
would be
shoulders.
interested. I'm sure he has commented on it at some point. I would be interested in knowing how Roy Keane feels about
But yeah,
being
Brett
portrayed.
Goldstein, who plays Roy Kent, I think is really driving this show.
Him and at the moment so far in this season, him and Jamie Tart, I would say. But yeah, on that note, should we flip things over to our interview?
Let's do it.
Well, we're now delighted to be joined by our guest, Darren Tulett, journalist, broadcaster, a face and a name and a voice that will be very familiar to our French audience as sort of the English face of French football, but someone who's covered a wide range of sports. Thank you, Darren, for taking the time to join us.
Well, very happy to be with you.
And I guess maybe that's the good place to start. You have a kind of unique position, certainly within the French sports media. It's quite common to see foreign sports journalists appear in the UK or in the US covering certain sports. It seems to be less of a thing certainly in France, but also in other European countries. How did it come about that you became a kind of English journalist on French TV?
Yeah, it is a kind of weird thing when you think about it. Yeah, because obviously, I operate in French, and any of the French people who've watched me on TV over here for the last 20 years, if they're tuning in today, it might be the first time they've actually heard me speak in my language, because yes, I've been working in French for the past 20 years on French TV, and it started in a very one of those strange stories where you don't expect this to happen at all. But basically, I was living in Paris as a sports reporter for Bloomberg News, the American company. And we only had a small sports desk, and we were covering just major events, basically. And I was writing a few sports business stories. And I'd been transferred over from London to Paris to cover Soccer World Cup in 1998. And then I stayed here and went out on the Tour de France in the years when Lance Armstrong was winning the race at the beginning and when everybody was very enthusiastic about it at the beginning. And I got to cover lots of big major sports events for Bloomberg. And then one day, having been here for a few years, and I guess people in the French media starting to get used to the idea that I was often around, somebody said to me, hey, this French guy from French radio station said, would you be free tonight? Because we're doing a show about, English football. And at the time, there were so many French players playing in the Premier League that the French audience was very interested in what was going on in the Premier League. And they said, like with your accent, as an English guy who speaks French, but obviously I still have a bit of an accent when I speak French. He said, it would really be kind of cool on the radio as an audio thing. The French audience will hear your English accent and will immediately give you some kind of credibility, because they go, the French like to call English guys roast beef because that's what they imagine that we eat, and we call them frogs. And anyway, this guy said to me, have an accent of a roast beef on the radio, it would be kind of cool for us. It would be fun. So I decided not to take umbrage at the fact that I still had an accent, because I was like, I'm sorry, what accent? But I was like, okay, yeah, sure, I can do that. As long as you don't pretend I'm in England or something. I live in Paris. And he said, don't worry, we're not going to say where you are. We're just going to say, we'll be joined this evening by our English friend, Darren Tulett, as they pronounce it in French. And there I was on the radio, national radio in France, talking about French soccer players in England. And apparently that went quite well because they asked me to come back the next week. And before I knew it, I was doing this as a regular thing. And before I knew it, also being exploited, of course, because I was not being paid for anything for this at all. But it was just fun for me. And I thought this is something different, And I was, when I started living in France many years ago, one of the questions I used to ask myself was, how can I turn my disadvantage, i.e. not really speaking the language and being different, how can I turn that into an advantage, Actually bring something to the table, be useful as an English guy in Paris. And of course, you had to get to the stage where you could speak the language reasonably well before I could actually make that work for me. But I suddenly realized at that moment, hey, this is actually, now being an Englishman here, now I can speak a bit of French. This is a card for me I can play, And they were happy to have this English guy on the radio show. And it only lasted a few weeks before, and this is where we get to the TV things. This is the lucky break that I got, was that a French TV program was being launched, or kind of relaunched, if you like. It was a Sunday night show. They used to call it L'équipe du dimanche, the Sunday team, if you like. And the French sports daily over here is called L'équipe as well. So L'équipe du dimanche, the Sunday team, was at 11 p.m. show. I'm talking 21 years ago. And this was your one rendezvous of the week where you could see all the goals, if you're living in France, all the goals scored in England, in Germany, in Spain and in Italy, the four major championships, And this was before social networks, social media. So for many of the games, you had not seen the goals, Maybe over the weekend, the Canal Plus, who were the TV station who was doing this show, they might show a couple of English games and maybe the big game in Spain and the big game in Germany. But that was it. All the other games, you didn't know. All you knew was the score. You hadn't seen the goals. There was nowhere to go, like today, where you can see the goals, minutes after they've been scored on your phone or something. Back in the day, this wasn't possible. So this was a real rendezvous. People would turn up at 11 on Sunday because they wanted to see what Barcelona had done. They wanted to see that goal they'd heard about, scored by somebody, in the Premier League. They wanted to see what Juventus had done that weekend. So the show was already quite popular until, like I say, the guy decided to redesign it and have somebody to represent each of those championships. So around the table with the experienced pro presenter, they went out and looked for, an English guy in Paris who can talk about the Premier League, somebody from Spain, somebody from Germany, somebody from Italy. And thankfully for me, as they were reaching out for people, they got in touch with the guy from the radio station and said, God, we're really desperately trying to find people. The show's got to start soon. We don't have anybody for the moment for England. Do you know any guys or girls who could do this? And my man was like, hey, I have a roast beef for you, and put me in touch with the guy at Canal Plus. This was, literally days before the show started. I had a phone call from the guy at Canal Plus on Monday. We had lunch together on Tuesday, and I made my debut on the Sunday. No rehearsal, no casting, or no, they were just they were so desperate they only had me, And my great good fortune was that around the table, all of us were amateurs doing TV for the first time, more or less. We were all pretty bad, if I'm honest, including me. But I wasn't the worst. So the time that it took them to get rid of one or two of the other guys who just weren't made to cut out for the TV, by the time they got rid of those people, I kind of started to get the hang of it. And they kept me on, and I did a second season. And even though I still had my full-time job with Bloomberg, and at the end of the second season, I had to make a choice whether I was going to join TV full-time or carry on as a written journalist, a press journalist, which is what I was. And I decided to plump for the TV fun, and it was a risky decision, but here I am 20 years later. It's all been a lot of fun.
Yeah, and you kind of carved out that identity, a kind of semi-caricature maybe of an English person in terms of what you represented on French television. How much did you then lead into that, say, even from an accent standpoint? Did you try and put on a sort of extra English person speaking French accent than you maybe would have done as soon as you...
Yeah, your question is wise. At the beginning, I didn't do anything in particular at all. I just turned up with my regular clothes on, and the way I spoke was the best I could do in French, you know. Um, and I really am quite unaware of any of the accent that I have. I know that even today, after 30 years in France, I speak fluent French, but I can get away with maybe a couple of minutes. But if I meet somebody new, a French person, it's only going to take them a couple of minutes to work out that okay, my French is fluent, but yeah, something's going to give me away. As you all know, everything in France has a section. A bottle is not just a bottle; it's une bouteille. It's not a. Everything has it's a le or la. The table. You got to. Oh God, is it la table or le table? So yeah, I'm going to make a mistake somewhere along the line. But so that wasn't a thing that I leaned into. What I did lean into was the look. The style and my clothes, because after a few weeks, it's a very weird thing when you've never done TV before and that wasn't something you were looking to do. It's kind of accidentally happened to you. Well, you suddenly start realize that people start recognizing you, when you're taking the bus or something, and they go, isn't that guy off the TV? And people start talking to me or coming up to me, and then I start to realize that this is a whole new medium. I've been writing stories up to now. Nobody cared whether I was well dressed or whether I was in my pajamas at the office. But suddenly, of course, before I even open my mouth, I'm on TV. They're looking at you. This is the first thing they see is what you look like. And it's true that at that time, my vestimentaire, kind of the things I used to wear back in the day, I was more like I don't know, maybe on a kind of Beatles vibe, sort of late 60s, like sort of slim fit suits and a few polka dots like I'm wearing today, actually. But yeah, nothing out of the ordinary. And I admit that after a few months, and when I realised how much what I was wearing seemed to interest people, then I really did lean into it. And I used to go to London and pick up clothes at Carnaby Street. I used to go to Camden Market. And I met this crazy story. I met an Austrian tailor in Camden Market in London, which is a huge marketplace for kind of alternative and secondhand, sometimes clothes. This was an Austrian tailor whose whole thing was like swinging 60s in London. That was his scene, He was totally into it. And he was remaking clothes from that period. So some of the stuff was like way out there, a bit like Austin Powers, So that was how far I went. I once turned up in an Austin Powers style purple corduroy suit. I think that was probably I couldn't go any further down that line, and I had to kind of scale it back little by little after that. But yeah, I did lean into it because it was fun and people seemed to enjoy it, And when I went out and met football players, for example, and I started doing interviews with guys who played in the Premier League, all the French guys, and then particularly some of the guys who have African backgrounds were coming up to me. They loved it, all this colour and everything. And I remember meeting Kolo Touré. I don't know if you remember him. He used to play football. And I saw him after a game, and he came running up to me. He's like, "Oh, Darren!" And he was chatting away. He said, "Don't move. I've got to go and get my wife. She loves you." And his wife comes up, like, they like your colourful clothes. We love you for this. And so, I realised that this was, like a fun thing, and I also realised that, hey, these things do matter. You're on TV, and what you look like, it has an effect. So, for a little while there, I really let myself go.
It's quite funny because one of the things I read that I really enjoyed was that the Daily Telegraph called you the Austin Powers of French television. So at least I'm happy you appreciate it, and I'm sure it's a nickname you take some pride in. It sounds like so. You're
gonna have fun with these things,
So I guess going back a little to the beginning when you first started on radio and then got into television. I mean, I've also lived in France for a few years, and Parisians can be very particular about their language. So were you ever really nervous? And how long did it take you to get really comfortable speaking the language and not saying "Oh crap, are they gonna roast me?" I guess you're not in the social media days, so you probably got saved from that a little bit, where the first few ones maybe you had some mess ups and they weren't able to kind of post on TikTok about how bad your accent was or your grasp of the language. But was that something you were nervous about or very self-conscious about?
No, not at all, because funnily, it was almost encouraged. They even seemed to like it when I made mistakes. It made it more fun. And this is something where you're lucky. You're actually being able to play your foreigner card and get away with it. Of course, yeah. If I was French and I made a grammatical error, people would be all over you. But as as a foreigner, and you know how it is, even if you come over on vacation or something, if you make the effort, to say a few words, then people will appreciate it and they'll let you get away with, murdering their language. So yeah, I felt very lucky in the fact that people were really very kind to me about that, And I actually, somebody sent me a little passage of one of my first shows from 20 years ago the other day, and with the guy who used to be the presenter, we watched it together because we had lunch together the other day, and we were laughing about it because I actually saw this bit where my French seemed to be better than it is perhaps today, and I was like, "What?" I had this memory of myself being dreadful at the beginning, but apparently, occasionally I would actually bring out, like a decent sentence. So I was quite surprised. So no, to be honest, it wasn't a problem. It actually turned into being like another draw for me. They enjoyed the fact that I had an accent. Once or twice I did mess up. They sent me out, for example. I became like, it's almost like the token English guy. Anything that was happening, on the English sports front, they'd send me along. Suddenly once they'd hired me. So there was a horse racing thing down at Longchamp, the big racetrack in the Paris suburbs, and the Arc de Triomphe, the big race at the end of the year. And some English trainers were coming over. English horses were very well fancied this year, as they often are actually. And they sent me along to help out the girl who used to do the interviews because her English wasn't very good. And they said, you can kind of shadow her and, you can ask the questions in English and translate them back for her and all this kind of stuff. So one day, I famously really cocked up. Standing next to her, she asked a question in French to this English horse trainer his name was Sir Michael Stout, who was very well bred as his horses. And he replied to this question in French. She said, what did she say? She said something along the lines of, it's been raining a lot recently. Are you worried about the ground for your horses? And what I did, rather than say it in English to him, I, for some reason, had brain fog, and I just paraphrased her French question into another French question. So I almost repeated the same thing. And Sir Michael Stout, the bugger, this is typical English, Of course, he spoke bloody fluent French, but wouldn't tell us. So he looked at me, in a kind of amused way, tapped me on the arm and said, en anglais, s'il vous plaît? In other words, can you say that in English now, please? And of course, that evening I was on the football show, and they showed that clip, during the football show. They're like, hey, we thought that Darren would be useful as a translator. This is how it worked out.
Yeah. Has that been interesting for you then? It must feel quite odd in a sense to have carved out quite a famous identity in France, but then when you go back to England or when you interact maybe with English athletes, to not have that same level of recognition or visibility. Do you like having almost anonymity if you're going home versus fame in this country that you've now made your home, I suppose?
Yes, well, it is funny. It is funny. I go back to London sometimes, and yeah, you're right. No English person is going to call out to me in the street, and say, but I can be in London, and so, some French guys might shout out my name, like, Darren, with the French, Darren, as they call me, and come running over to get a picture or something. And my English friends, who of course never see me on TV, they're like, oh Christ, you are well known in France, because they never get to see what I do. So it's kind of funny, yeah. When you go back to England, you're nobody, but then over here, it's not like I'm a rock star either. Let's face it. I'm on a pay TV, so it's only people who watch sport who know me. But what's funny is, I guess that's like 10 or 15% of the country over here, which still means 15 or 20 million. But anyway, what happens is quite often in France, there'll be a group of people in the street, and one or two of the group will know me so well because I'm in their house every other day. If you're really interested in sports, then you might have me in your lounge, very regularly. And then other people in their group who aren't big sports fans will not have ever seen me before. So you get this funny situation sometimes where there's one or two guys like going, "Oh my God, it's that guy, it's Darren, like, can I have a photo?" And the other guys in the group like, or maybe his wife's like saying, "What? Who? What? I've never seen him before. Why are you so excited?" So it's kind of fun.
Yeah, you must also then struggle with it. I once met Mike Brown in an airport, the old, still rugby player, but England fullback, and asked for a picture with him and an autograph. And then people piled on to, kind of the unfortunate snowball effect of once one person asks, people realize that it's someone famous. And at one moment, someone came up to ask for a photo for him from him. He took it with them, and then afterwards they said to him, "And by the way, who are you?"
Who are you?
And, which I felt very sorry for him at that moment. But he was very polite about it. But I mean, I suppose you might get a similar thing, you know, if you're in a bar or a restaurant and all of a sudden people start to think he's clearly famous, but I'm not sure who he is. I better get a photo just in case.
Yeah, sometimes it give you some kind of
should-
embarrassing moments. Like I say, it was weird, you know, when I started out because it took me a little while to get used to that. Because when you've been, you know, when you're writing sports stories, nobody ever knows who the hell you are, and then suddenly from being on this TV screens, people seeing you, like I say, on the bus, on the metro, or around town. It's quite a strange thing at first because people are looking at you, you know, and you feel rather uncomfortable. It takes a little while to get used to the idea that people are going to look at you and get used to the idea that, you know, you as you become a public face, you have to accept the fact that, you know, people will come up and talk to you. But again, you know, this is not in any way a complaint. I'm really lucky because when you do sports, you know, you're a sports broadcaster, but nobody dislikes you. You know, if they watch you, they've chosen to be there. They've chosen to be watching sports. You know, you happen to be the guy who's, you know, maybe hosting the show, which is what I do now, rather than back in the day when I was just, you know, come on as the funny English guy and talk about a few highlights from the Premier League. Now I'm a sports host. And people would come up and because they're genuinely interested in sports. So when they come up, it's always with a smile. People always come up and want to be, you know, positive with me. You know, so it's extremely fortunate. I mean, I feel very lucky because how many people have this good fortune to do your job? You know, it's your daily thing. This is what you do, and have people come up to you and say, "Hey, really like what you do now. You do a great job." I mean, there are people out there doing much more important jobs, obviously, you know, and very rarely do they get a big pat on the back, you know, and I get it all the time, you know, and this is so I really don't complain about being recognised or having, you know, people come up to you in the street. Yeah, sometimes you know, maybe you wish that they'd choose a better moment. I once got interrupted when I was having my first kiss with a girlfriend on the streets of Paris. And guys kind of almost like broke up the kiss to get a picture, you know.
Although, what a way to impress the girl. So you're getting mobbed.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, was sports journalism always the dream growing up? Is that what you'd always want to be, or did this kind of just progress into, you know, what you're doing, what you became?
The dream was to be a journalist. At first, I wanted to be. As I grew up, I come from a working class family, and nobody had ever been to college before. So it wasn't so easy to convince myself that I could do something like be a journalist. It seemed, you know, like a big jump from my dad, who was a factory worker, and my mum, who brought up the four kids and like used to clean people's houses for them. So being the eldest of four, having no role model for going off to college or anything, I kind of, you know, wandered around a little bit in my in my late teens and early 20s, not really knowing what the hell I was going to do or how I was going to go about it. But sure, as a kid, when I was 12, 13, 14, and realized, you know, that I was quite good at school and my favorite thing was writing. And so therefore, you know, English. And that's where I felt that, you know, maybe I had something to give. And when I had my first careers meeting at the age of 13 or 14, and the guy sat down in front, you know, I had to sit down in front of this old guy, you know, who sit. I see him now as old. He's probably like my age, but, you know, I don't think of myself as old. But yeah, we know when you're 14, you're like, you know, anybody who's over 40 is like, you know, ancient. So I was like, who's this old guy? And the old guy's like, so what do you want to do when you grow up, young man? And I said, well, I'd like to be a journalist. And I'm not joking. The guy didn't even blink before saying to me, have you thought about the army? I was like, what the fuck? This guy, like, give me a break, man. You know, I know I come from, you know, maybe he had my address. He could see, like, you know, I grew up on the wrong side of the tracks or something. You know, I was like, give me a break. Give me a chance. I'm 14. You're not supposed to be here to, like, rain on my parade. You're supposed to encourage me. But it's funny how you know, that's still in my mind today, you know, like a long time afterwards. So it was something.
You're still scared that one day
Yeah,
you might
right.
be recruited again.
No, not the army. No, I always wanted to be a journalist, but I kind of lost the idea somewhere along the road because I went away to study. I only stayed 1 year at college, and I was a barman, and I was just hanging out and having fun with my friends who were still studying. And then I came over to Paris on a whim with a friend of mine because he actually had a plan. So I just followed him, and we ended up teaching English here, you know, in the sort of language schools. So for a little while out there, I was just kind of, I wouldn't say bumming around, but not far off it, just having a good time. and not really having a plan, you know. And I think maybe that was because of my upbringing. I didn't have anybody behind me saying like, hang on a second there, old chap, you're supposed to be a lawyer or a doctor and get back on track, For my mum, for example, I was in Paris teaching English, it's like, I was an amazing success story already. So there's no pressure, from the family to like do something else, like get a proper job or something, So it took me a little while to actually think, what, maybe I do need to try to give it a go and become a journalist, because this was, the one thing I did really dream of as a kid. And I left Paris basically after a few years here, my first stay. I went back to England and had this naive idea that at 26, 27, I could become a journalist. And of course, at that time, I had neither experience nor qualifications. But as you probably already realized, not bad at the old, bigging myself up. So I ended up, after 6 months of being unemployed back in England, realizing that my honest version of the CV was going to get me nowhere. And I thought it's time for a little bit of a creative writing exercise, So I got out a whole new piece of paper and did a whole new CV, imagining a different background for myself. So, I mean, there were some things which were true on it. I still had the same name and date of birth. But let's say,
Okay.
let's say that degree that I started in Manchester, now I had finished it and with flying colours. And also, let's say, rather than saying I'd been in Paris for 6 years teaching English, suddenly the last 2 or 3 years I'd been a journalist in Paris, writing for an English language newspaper. And the lucky thing, guys, is that back in those days, I'm talking 25 years ago, maybe a bit longer now, but back in those days, we're talking pre-internet, So if you turned up with a CV and said, yeah, you've done this, they couldn't then, Google it to see if it was true, and they couldn't see any articles anywhere because this didn't exist yet. And this was my big, winning card, basically, when I was back in London, So, yeah, I've been working for this newspaper in Paris and stuff, And the guys were kind of like, oh, yeah, tell me a little bit about that. But they weren't really, they didn't say, show me your body of work. So I got away with it, basically, I blagged my way into my first job.
You were like the Leonardo DiCaprio in Catch Me If You Can.
Maybe something a little bit like that,
yeah. So then, I mean, obviously, you've spoken about how you've covered more than just football, and I guess that's your first passion, perhaps. But what's been the sports what have you enjoyed covering the most that you maybe didn't expect? You kind of came into with very little knowledge or interest, and kind of getting involved from a coverage standpoint has made you develop a kind of a love for the sport.
I would say cycling. When I grew up in England, cycling as a sport was still a very, very minor thing. You might think it still is. But in England, it's become much more popular in recent years, thanks also to the fact that lots of English guys did really well in the Tour de France. And that was something when I was with Bloomberg that I got a chance to cover, like I said earlier, at the time of Lance Armstrong coming through, as a contender at the Tour de France. So that was, for me, a great experience because I love cycle racing. I love watching cycling. I'm really into it. And at the time, not that many people in the English sports journalism field, were capable. There was really, like I say, a niche. There was one or two, like magazines, those guys knew what they were talking about. But even most of the major newspapers in England didn't have a cycling expert on their teams, So for Bloomberg, I had this possibility of writing the occasional story about the sport of cycling. And like I said, the timing, again, was fantastic. This is what I often, say this, but I feel I've been very lucky, with the way things have gone along, during my career, because time gave me all sorts of opportunities. I start with being with Bloomberg just before there's this World Cup in France, and I can play the card that, I speak French, I used to live, that helped me, and I got to cover the World Cup. And then I'm in Paris when Lance Armstrong comes along, to win the Tour de France for the first time. And let's not forget that, I don't know about any younger people listening to us, but back in the day, in 1999, 1998, at the end of the 90s, basically, cycling was hit by a huge doping scandal. And there was this fear that, the Tour de France might have to be like wiped off the calendar because there was, nobody could believe the results anymore. And even though it's like ironic, of course, now we know that Lance Armstrong was a terrible cheat, like a lot of other people at that time. But when Lance Armstrong came along to win his first Tour de France, the story was fantastic because here was a guy who had come back from testicular cancer to be back on his bike, to be challenging for the world's most famous race and to win it as an American, and I was writing for an American news agency, Bloomberg News. So this was a huge story for us. And I was here at the heart of it. And another thing, guys, was, I wrote a big preview of the race that for the year he won it for the first time. So I had this interview with him on a nice little 1-to-1 for an hour. Wrote a big story, saying how this cancer comeback and a survivor from America could perhaps, relaunch cycling's biggest race, because a victory for Lance Armstrong would give, the cycling world a huge boost. If only we knew. But anyway, it was a great story, and I went down there to cover the beginning of the race, and I got into the village where it was kicking off on the Saturday. I got there Thursday, and Lance Armstrong wanted to do his press conference on that Thursday evening, and they had hired a translator, the people who organised the race, but he only arrived on Friday, the translator. So, because most people do their press conferences the day before, so they asked me to step in, at the last minute. So again, I'm using that card as the English guy who speaks French. I found myself on stage with Lance Armstrong, who I'd just done the interview with a couple of weeks earlier. So he was like, "Oh yeah, I remember you." And then he realised, thanks to this interview, because the whole world's media was there, TV, radio, and press, and it was an hour-long press conference where I knew that Lance Armstrong spoke reasonably good French. He understood French rather well. He did ride briefly for a French team. And there I was on stage with him, being careful to get the translation right, showing him also by what I was saying and how I was saying it that I knew the sport and understood the tactics and what was going on and everything. So that helped me have a good relationship with him. He trusted me, from the beginning, because he's like, okay, this guy seems okay. I didn't know at that time, how Lance Armstrong would go on to win the Tour de France and how he would win the Tour de France, But at the beginning, it was a fantastic experience for me to be out there covering this event, having access to this guy who was, becoming the dominant force in this sport, So it was rather exciting. And the whole adventure, logistically speaking, of being out on the road for 3 weeks and covering an event like that, wow, that is really something, And until you've done it, you just can't realize, how tiring it is, because, you never stay in the same hotel bed for 2 nights. It is the Tour de France. You do go all around France, which is quite something, And it's back in the day, again, before you had something, like a GPS in your car. And I was a one-man band in the first year or two that I covered the thing. So I was there in the car, I'd finish, the stage would finish, I'd write 2 or 3 stories afterwards, for Bloomberg, the race report, like a brief, then a flesh it out, then with quotes, then a preview for the next day, and then maybe I'd touch up a colour piece which I'd been working on. It would get to like 9, 10 o'clock at night. I'd finally finished filing my stories, try and get a bite to eat somewhere. Then I'd have to get in my car, open up the map, the old paper maps, which, who uses those? I'd be in a car on my own in the middle of France somewhere with a map this big, okay, so I'm here. How do I get from here to the hotel where I'm sleeping tonight? I'd get lost. I'd turn up at 2 in the morning. I'd have to be out of the hotel by 6 or something the next day because there was another mountain stage coming up. You had to be there early, otherwise you'd miss. Anyway, it was kind of chaotic and crazy, and it absolutely exhausted me. But they're some of the best memories I have, because I found it thrilling to be out there and meeting all these guys. I have great admiration for people in that sport because it's such a tough sport, and the danger is there as well, with the accidents they have, and every now and then we have a tragedy in cycling. But it was really thrilling to be out there and to meet these people, to have close contact with the stars. So yeah, Tour de France was perhaps my most exciting thing outside of football.
Staying on the Tour de France theme briefly then, eventually the narrative with Lance Armstrong started to shift. And for a while, there was a thought that it was a kind of a persecution almost from the French press. In particular, I think L'Equipe kind of leading the charge, that they were upset that an American was coming and winning the Tour de France, and some of the accusations associated with him with doping that he was so vehemently denying. When did you start to see that kind of narrative shift? And when was there a change maybe within the press and the atmosphere, depending on where they were from, in terms of how they perceived him as a figure?
Well, it was fascinating because at first, there's always, a minority who doubt any champions winning anything in any sports, as if like, if you finish first, you must have, you must be doing something. sadly. But in cycling, of course, there's a bigger number of people who are suspicious because cycling has had all sorts of problems with drug taking in the past. But at first, after the troubled years at the end of the 90s, the Armstrong story was a feel-good story even in France, and most people, at least for the first year or two, thought it was great. And then there was his attitude. Lance Armstrong is kind of, I had close contact with him. He was, he could be quite scary. He had a real force of character, and when he fixed you with those steely blue eyes of his, and told you his truth, you're kind of like, yeah, okay, man, yeah, that's what I'm going to write. That's okay, because you wanted to believe him for a start. The guy who's recovered from cancer, and he's telling you, hey, why would I, having come back from that, do you think I'd put stuff in my body that I didn't know about? You think I'd take a risk? What are you talking about, man? How dare you, kind of thing, And you'd be like, okay, and then you realize afterwards he never had actually, he used to say things like, I don't cheat, I don't do this, or, I wouldn't do that. But he never actually said, no, I don't take drugs, because that was a step too far. But he was an extremely intelligent guy and a magnificent athlete. And I still think to this day, had everybody been not cheating, if everybody was clean, then he still would have been winning. You see what I mean? He basically came along at a time where, and this is how he convinced himself to take these products. He knew that he was better than most people in cycling at that time. And suddenly, from being the guy who could win races, he couldn't keep up with people anymore. And he knew full well what they were doing. So in his mind, to make it a level playing field again, he just needed to take the same stuff as everybody else. And for him, therefore, that's why he was able to say, and really believe, I think, no, I'm not cheating. Because what he meant was, we're all taking stuff. So i.e., that's not cheating. If everyone's doing it, it's not cheating. It's kind of like, this is the way it is. This is what I've had to do because that's what everyone else is doing. But now that, I think in his mind, now that it was like, okay, I'm just doing what everyone else is doing, therefore we're good. We can go. So, it did turn around, of course. And once little signs started appearing, little cracks in the story, because he'd get he'd fail a test on something and then he'd get out of it on a technicality or come up with some sort of story which got him off the hook. Because you have to remember also that the cycling, the guys who were running cycling in those days, the federation, didn't want this to come out. They wanted to help Armstrong cover up the stuff because they knew, that if it came out that this guy was cheating, this could be the end of the sport, So, it was a really tough time. And I did have one or two moments, for example, in the Bloomberg newsroom where Lance Armstrong would call me, because he knew I was in France and I had, certain information and I knew the stuff that was going on and he wanted to get his story out there. So, every now and then I would get used as a journalist because he had something to say and he needed a voice, and a story. And he knew that Bloomberg, as a press agency, a news agency, had the possibility to get stories in newspapers around the world. So every now and then, I would actually get that voice on the phone. Everyone around me in the office was kind of like, "Fuck, it's Lance Armstrong on the phone." Like, shh, and I'd be, so yes, what is it that I can do for you? It's kind of strange things that happen to you sometimes along the way. But that was quite, quite something.
You put used in inverted commas there. As a journalist, I mean, I presume at some point you're being used, but you also know that Lance Armstrong is a valuable enough contact that you are sort of happy. It's a deal you're kind of agreeing to. How do you balance that then as a journalist?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because Bloomberg was a very strict school. You couldn't just write a story, with one voice in it normally. So I would have to go and then get other voices, other sources. But when it was a story like that, when it was something with such a major figure, they would allow me to write it in a certain way. It's not my voice. It was quite clear that we are saying what Lance Armstrong has told us, kind of thing. And then I would go back and talk to other people in the sport to see what we could get going, to flesh out the story. But yes, you're right. Of course, when somebody that important in a sport, is calling you, then you just want to use that, and it's a great contact to have. So my employer was happy that I was being used in that way, as long as we continued to write stories which were balanced, and gave other people's point of view as well.
Yeah, and when you watch all the documentaries and things about what happened, the common thing is like exactly what you said. He was very intelligent and very persuasive, and it sounds like he was able to use his contacts in that kind of way. So it does make sense. And when you first started this story, I thought you were going to tell us it was another bad translation on your part, and that he did admit right at the start he admitted, and you just said he did it accidentally. I said my first press conference I was. What are you talking about?
Didn't translate it correctly.
But I mean, kind of going off of that, which I'm sure he was probably a great person to interview and had a real good conversation with. And a lot of times people always want to know what are your worst interviews? What were the ones that you couldn't wait to kind of end or get off because it was tough? But what are some of the best people that you've ever interviewed that after it's done you wish, like, damn, I wish I had another 2, 4, 8 hours. I could talk all day to this person. What were some of like the best ones in your mind that you'd love to just keep talking all the time?
People like Eric Cantona, the French football player when he was with Manchester United. He was a fascinating figure. Kind of the most charismatic ones are obviously the ones you want to hang out with more because they fascinate us. Cantona was one of these guys who just filled a room with his presence and didn't really say much. This was like part of his success in English football was he almost never spoke. And then, of course, when he did, he would come out with weird stuff about seagulls and trawlers and then get up and walk away, So just fascinating, So it was wonderful to get time with him. And occasionally I did get some time to hang out for a big piece I did. I once wrote an Observer story with Eric Cantona, spent the weekend with him. And that was rather special because, you had to get his trust. And this was one of the lucky things, again, about being the Englishman on French TV. He saw me, saw what I did. And so I think he was nicer to me than he would be to most French journalists, It's almost like he would sneer at the French journalists and then he'd be like, there's the English guy, he knows what he's talking about, which I didn't. But anyway, it was nice of him to be so kind. And he was a fun person to hang out with and to write about. And I think other people with great charisma include, like Zinedine Zidane, who I interviewed a couple of times, and found very hard to break through because when he was a player, I don't know if you remember, but he didn't like talking in front of a camera at all. It was really tricky to get anything out of him, So that was a real, I enjoyed the challenge, of actually seeing if I could get him to say anything interesting. Now, of course, he's turned into a football manager, which none of us expected when he was, when we were covering him as a player, because he was so introverted as a football player, at least. I saw him behind the scenes sometimes and saw that he was much different when he was with his friends and his colleagues, his other teammates in the French team. But it was difficult to get anything out of him. Whereas now, he's used to being interviewed all the time as a manager. He did press conferences 5 times a week, so he fitted it. He's completely changed. But back in the day, he was a fun person to try to get something out of. And then, so back in the days when I used to cover tennis for Bloomberg, I would be at Roland Garros and hanging out with some of those people was interesting because I found that they had a much easier relationship with press and journalists. They were used to talking, of course, after every game. This is also a thing I've noticed from afar, but American sports as a whole, you have much better access as a sports reporter. You can actually go in the changing room and talk to people. So Americans are much more at ease. I found, in my early days as a reporter, that with the press and tennis people were similar. So I got lucky. I managed to sit in with a young Roger Federer when he was being interviewed by a couple of Swiss reporters. So I kind of snuck in there, and they're probably thinking, like, what's he doing here? But anyway, the three of us, had this time with Roger Federer, and he was still young then, hadn't won a Grand Slam. He was, a promising player. And to be honest, I'd just seen him play at Roland Garros, so he's still young, but he was quite moody in the early days, and
he was a bit of a bad boy at first.
Yeah, and if you told me, that, hey, this guy will go on to be, perhaps the greatest ever player in tennis's history, you'd have been hard pushed to believe it, But I did find him, already fascinating as a speaker. He was, he could just sit there and tell it as he saw it and be totally ease. Whereas I was used to running into football players, as I was saying, and having to trying to squeeze a decent sentence out of them. And there's these guys, just really at ease. And I got to meet some of the former tennis greats as well. So when you get to talk to people like John McEnroe, different world, and some of the French guys I've been lucky enough to be able to hang out with, Yannick Noah, for example. That's Mr. Charisma, an amazing story, amazing family story, with his dad being a professional soccer player, him being a brilliant tennis player, still the last French guy to win the Roland Garros, and then his son, as you know very well, going on to be a big star in the NBA. I mean, how many times does that happen, to one family, 3 generations, 3 world-class athletes in 3 different sports. So that's a remarkable story. And I've always loved hanging out on the rare occasions I've been able to do so with Yannick Noah, because he's a real charismatic guy, who's been there, done it, and likes to live it up when he tells you about it.
Just maybe quickly following on from what you said about Eric Cantona,
Mm-hmm.
you said it maybe took him a little bit to warm to you and open up. Once he was more comfortable with you, is the Eric Cantona that you see publicly, is he the same person then in his private? Is he kind of speaking in vague philosophical sentences, or does he become a sort of, I don't want to use normal as a negative, but a kind of more normal person?
No, he's now he's older, of course, and got. I think basically he enjoyed. We were talking about how I enjoyed playing with the clothing side of things, and sometimes went a little bit too far. I think he enjoyed that as well when he was a player towards the end of his career. When he was younger, he was a real hothead, as a player, and would just do crazy stuff on the field. And when he was playing in France, I mean, you saw him in England, jump into the crowd with a kung fu kick on a spectator who'd insulted him. In France, he would kick opponents, spit at referees, swear and shout at the French national football team manager, calling him a dick and all sorts of things. So that was before he got to England. So when he got to England, I guess he decided that the less he spoke, the better he would be. And like I say, he turned that into a whole sort of mysterious character, and he did it very well. And as he got older, and the rare times I see him around nowadays, because I think he's living in Lisbon right now. But anyway, the few times I see him now, he still enjoys playing with it. He enjoys getting up on stage and reliving the moment of like, hey, I'm the kind of like slightly dangerous, slightly mysterious French guy. For him, it's become a fun thing. And of course, he gets to use that as well if he wants to. He can money that because advertisers love him. He's such a big personality. And that reminds me, excuse me, of the ad he did in England when I don't remember. I think it was Nike, but anyway, there were these. I don't know if you remember this. There were these huge ads all at a certain moment around the country in England. Anyway, saying 1966 was a great year for British football. This was when Cantona was playing for Manchester United, and of course, 1966 for any British guy is immediately like, oh yeah, of course, that's the year where England won the World Cup. Still, the only time England ever won the Soccer World Cup. So when you see the first picture, like 1966 was a great year for British soccer or English football or whatever they use, you're like, okay, yeah, I get it. You're talking about the World Cup. No, the next picture was Eric Cantona was born. So it's very clever, a great marketing line. And he was a big star in Manchester United at that moment. And that fits so well. It's really clever because it fits so well with him. That's the kind of thing that, he would now, enjoy saying and have fun with, because he loves to be, to go against the grain and be the rebel and everything. And that is part of who he is. Absolutely, yes. But does he add on to that? Does he play with it and exaggerate? Yes, he does, of course. And he enjoys going up on stage and saying, like weird and wonderful things. And then I see him backstage, and he'll say, I think I got them again there. I go, yeah, I think you did, Eric. I think you did,
Well, I guess maybe kind of transitioning a bit into the actual football discussion, just because it's a shame to not have your kind of knowledge and experience in covering the sport. Talking about the luck that you've had and the good timing, you've also coincided with covering French football at a moment when the massive investment in PSG has put maybe French football a little bit more on the map than it was previously, even though they've had success in European leagues and European competitions prior to that. How much does it become tiresome a little bit to have the narrative of French football be so dominated by what's going on with PSG? And do you think in any way it's a possible danger to the long-term success of professional football in France to just have one team really be this sort of focus of all attention?
I know why you're asking me that. At the same time, I'm tempted to say no, it's not really such a big problem. Look at Germany. Bayern Munich have been champions for the last 10 years. Do people think the Bundesliga is less interesting or of lesser quality because of that? Maybe some people do, but I watch German football regularly. It's still exciting. The stadiums are full week in, week out. Great atmosphere when you want to go and see a game in Germany. Brilliant place to go and watch football. So PSG dominating, I don't think it's that much of a problem. I think that, well, in fact, I know that the owners of PSG were really genuinely hoping that their arrival would help boost the whole of French football, and that yes, other investors, would be welcome to help boost the whole level of French football. But I still think that despite PSG's problems, they obviously winning the Champions League is their holy grail, and they haven't done it, and that is a problem because every year it comes around, every springtime when they don't go through to the final. It's a problem for everybody involved in the club, but I still think that they've kind of succeeded in what they wanted to do. I mean, the fact we're talking about PSG, is a sign of success in itself, in a way, because would we have been having a conversation about French football and PSG 10 years ago? Probably not, because it wasn't so interesting, But they've made it interesting, even if they probably would have enjoyed having more positive coverage sometimes. Of course, most of the time, people spend time laughing at PSG's problems, But I found it a fascinating ride to cover, and to be so close to it. It really is something, which will be written about for years to come, I think. And it's fascinating to see how they've tried to recreate or to create different teams, year after year, with errors made along the way, but sometimes with great, decisions made as well. I mean, at the beginning, when Leonardo was in charge of bringing players in, I have to remember that, 2012, he brought in, the young Marco Verratti, who very few people had even heard of, became a superstar. And of course, he brought in Thiago Silva and Zlatan, who were the opposite. They were already stars with Milan, but went on to be two major figures, in recent years of PSG's success. You could build a team around them, and Thiago Motta was the other one that I used to absolutely love watching play. So they did have, some great moments. They did get to the final, of course, and it could have gone either way, and they lost that one to Bayern Munich. And of course, it was a former PSG player who scored the only goal of the game, Kingsley Coman. So yeah, there's all sorts of narratives all the time, but I don't think that that it's a bad luck story or a bad time story. I think it's. What was the expression people? It was the showbiz thing, wasn't it? As long as they're talking about you, then that's the main thing, and people will always be talking about this PSG team, won't they?
And so then, I mean, approaching, probably another rebuilding period, coming towards the end of the time with Messi, certainly, and eventually with Neymar, and the chance to, I guess, build totally around Mbappe. Where do you think? How do you think they could more efficiently build around Mbappe to take advantage of the skills that he possesses, in the hope of getting over that final hurdle, which is the missing Champions League win?
Well, for start, I've spoken to lots of people in football, including coaches, and I've had great good fortune to work with Arsene Wenger over the years with beIN Sports, who never won the Champions League, of course, but also to have chatted to people like Jose Mourinho, who did. But nearly every coach will say to you, winning the league is what counts, because that's over 38 or 42 games over a season. That's where you prove yourself as a coach. And they'll always say a competition like the Champions League, which becomes a knockout competition, it becomes a question of luck. Are all your best players fit on the night that you need them on that quarterfinal, away to Madrid or something? Or, are you going to hit the post and the ball come back out, or hit the post and the ball go in? What I'm saying is cup competitions, things happen, and you can just be unlucky. And like Arsene Wenger, never win the Champions League. So even though I accept that, this is how they're going to be judged, these PSG years, as did they or did they not reach their goal of winning the Champions League, I find it fascinating right now as to what might happen. And your question about Mbappe is obviously the one which people at the club are wondering about. For a start, he chose to stay, but will he still want to stay? Is he already chomping at the bit? We don't know, do we? Is he already thinking, you know what, maybe I'll just do one more year, then I am going to get out of here, because he has that option. He's the man in charge, and the big stars these days in world sports have so much more power than they used to just a few years ago. Mbappe will decide. He's got one more year of a contract and then an option, which he has to. Both him and the club have to activate if he decides to stay. He might well think, you know what, I'm never going to win the Champions League with PSG, and I'll get out of here in a year's time. It's possible. He's very attached to. He's a bit, in that sense, like Cristiano Ronaldo. Numbers, records. He wants to be the guy who. So he's become the record goal scorer for PSG already. He's only 24. No one at the club has ever scored as many goals. So he's already got that one under his belt. He's reaching week after week or month after month. There's a new record in sight. There's a new aim. Something like in the French national team. He's already set his sights on the number of goals that Michel Platini scored. He's moving up the charts in the French team. He's doing. He's setting new records with PSG all the time. Part of me thinks that and a part of him likes the idea of staying with PSG for years and like being that guy who's from here and getting his hometown club to win things. I think that appeals to him, and be the record guy for everything. But then there's also a part of him that just wants to win that Champions League. And if he thinks if he thinks this summer or next summer that it's not going to happen with PSG, it's going to be really hard to hold on to him, and he's going to want to go somewhere else. But right now, it's difficult to see where he would go, isn't it? Because having said no to Real Madrid when they so obviously were close to getting him, it's not going to be easy to go back there, because you've burnt bridges. It's tricky. Barcelona can't sign somebody who would cost that much right now because of their financial situation. So that leaves Italy and England. They could try, yeah. But that would leave. I think Mbappe, after what happened with Real Madrid, he would never go to Barcelona. So that leaves Italy. But Italian football not so rich right now. To get somebody maybe of Mbappe's value be tricky. So that would leave England, and where would he be a good fit right now? In England, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because obviously a guy who is as good as Mbappe, you think, well, he kind of any club would want him. But where would he go if he wanted to go to England tomorrow, and be sure that, this was a move because he wants to win the Champions League? Where would you go? Would he, Manchester City are the best team in England, probably right now, even though Arsenal are the leaders. But would he go to Manchester City? I mean, can you imagine that? I don't know. They've already got Haaland, and who knows what's going to happen up there. Are Liverpool the same bet as they would have been a year ago? Because we don't know, because Klopp is kind of rebuilding as well, So I think he's in an interesting situation with PSG. The club obviously would like to build around him, and perhaps therefore say thank you and goodbye to Lionel Messi. But then, you need to bring in people who are going to make it happen around Mbappe. And right now, you would imagine that needs another, maybe 4 or 5 new players. So that's a lot of money as well, And as you were saying, always rehaul and redo and rethink and rebuild. It is kind of tiring, isn't it? And you're running out of coaches, because you go through them so quickly. So I guess people, would still want to come here and coach, because, who wouldn't? But at the same time, even the top coaches know that it's a real challenge, because they don't always seem to have total liberty.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple good points there. I mean, because some parallels in a sense with Harry Kane, in that once you start crunching the numbers, the number of viable landing spots for any of these superstar players, they work their way down. And Frank, just before you ask your question, I think the other interesting point that you said kind of at the beginning there, and talking about whether or not this sort of PSG project has been a success based purely on the domestic dominance, which is, undeniable. It's very interesting to see the transformation, I think, in the coverage of European football leagues and as a whole. Like Ferguson's sort of success at United or dominance there was mainly, yes, he won 2 Champions Leagues, but it's framed around the dominance in the league. Same with Wenger or even Mourinho early on at Chelsea. So we're not going that long ago when your kind of European accomplishments weren't significant. But then, say Guardiola, if he finishes at City and doesn't win a Champions League, I think people would probably say it wasn't a successful stint, or at least didn't achieve the primary goal. Do you think across the board within PSG, if there's no Champions League win during this kind of time period, they would say, yeah, we're still content with that. We did what we aimed to do?
Oh, I think they would say that. do I think they would believe what they say? No, I do think that they have really, like set their sights on that as this is what they need, and I think if you're running PSG right now, their viewpoint is, winning the French league is just a given. They should also be winning the French Cups, which they're not going to win this year. So, yeah, I mean, winning the French league's not enough anymore for PSG, and it's a bit like Bayern Munich, isn't it? Look, Bayern Munich are still in the Champions League, having eliminated PSG, and chances are they will be German champions again, even though they're being threatened by Dortmund this season. I think they'll probably still end up finishing top. And yet they've just kicked out their trainer, their manager, their head coach, because it's not good enough, because, just winning the Bundesliga and still having a shout at the Champions League is not enough, because they need to be, they want to be 10 points ahead in Germany rather than fighting it out with. I mean, this is how tough it is at the top, I guess. You can be in charge of a team which is winning, but you're not winning enough, or not winning well enough, or not winning everything. I mean, it's kind of crazy to me that Nagelsmann can be replaced because in the situation that Bayern Munich are in right now, and Christophe Galtier at PSG will be obviously under huge pressure right now, because PSG can only win the French league, and that will probably be considered as not good enough. So we're gonna have some weeks here of wondering whether he's still going to be on the bench next season, and if not, we'll be again in that cycle of, okay, so who's it going to be now? And as you were saying, who do we rebuild with to convince Mbappe to stay here and be the main man?
Yeah, and I guess going back to the Mbappe part, maybe going to the Premier League, I think of that transition as kind of in American sports when they talk about, going to like the New York market, and the media is going to be on you 24/7, every second, every move you make, whether it's on the court, on the field, whatever, off the court, on the field, it's constant. And I think with Mbappe, he's in a situation right now where, like you said, he's in his hometown, he's in his home country, he's dominating there, he's on top of the world. But if he were to move to the Premier League, what, in terms of like a mental aspect, do you think that will be tough for him as a young kid who's never had this constant barrage where he could go out and play, a team on the lower end of the table and not score those 3-4 goals super easily and cut through defenders, and then he's going to hear about it? Do you think? I'm sure he can handle it, but do you think that's going to be an issue? Would that be an issue for him a little bit?
I would think absolutely not. This guy is, he's not like anybody else. My comparison would be perhaps with Thierry Henry. I was lucky to be on French TV just when he was, shining with Arsenal. So I get to hang out around the Arsenal team of that time and see close up how Thierry Henry dealt with being, arguably the biggest star in English football over those years. The greatest goal scorer in Arsenal's history, and wonderful, player. And he had that, quality that Mbappe has, in that he was born for that, and Henri was at ease in front of the cameras with microphones. He already, I interviewed him so many times after games, and some people would come off the pitch and they can't really find their words, or they haven't even really digested the game, and they perhaps need to see it again to understand what happened. Henri was never like that. Henri was just like Mbappe, walk off the pitch and tell you exactly what happened and why, and what went wrong or what went right, and how it went right and how it went wrong, and what they need to do and what I need to, brilliant. These guys, they're on a different level. Henri was like that, and I'm sure that Mbappe is the same. And Mbappe, I think, would thrive in an atmosphere like that. I don't think there's any worry at all. I would be 100% confident that he would walk into that kind of arena and just take positives from it. And the more attention he gets, the less a problem it is. He really is so bright and so well spoken, and he's just he's become captain of the France team. The first couple of press conferences he did as captain of the French soccer team, it's one of the greatest teams right now in world football. It's just water off a duck's back. This guy, like I say, he's only 24, but he's so smart. He makes it look so easy. He finds the right words. He knows what he wants to say and how to go about it. Now the kid, bluffs me all the time. I would have no worries. He doesn't need to be, mollycoddled, or you don't need to hold his hand. He would go to the Premier League tomorrow. Piece of cake. Seriously, I think he would be brilliant with any team. He'd score a hatful of goals with any team in England, and I think he would enjoy the attention. I'm sure, because he's so good at just soaking it all in, and I think it would be a fun thing. He'd actually enjoy it all.
Well, I mean, I think in many ways, as sort of football fans, as neutrals, you kind of want to see him go and get tested at I won't say higher level, because it's not with any disrespect necessarily to the French league, but certainly
no, I know what you mean.
A standard of opponent that maybe tests him more week in, week out. So I can say that. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you've been really generous with your time. So maybe if we do one final question each, I'm going to switch you away. Usually try and end on some maybe a bit more fun questions. We've spoken about the range of sports that you've covered. Is there one event that you've not yet had the opportunity to cover that you really wish that you could be there as a broadcaster or a journalist?
Yes, I was fortunate enough to cover the 2012 London Olympics. And that was another highlight for me as an Englishman as well, being there and seeing it work so well. The games were fantastic. And I was in the stadium for the 100 meters final with Usain Bolt, and I was out watching field hockey and handball and you name it, I saw it. And it was wonderful. And the cycling was fantastic. So I kind of clocked off the Olympics thing. So the thing that springs to my mind, even though I know the Olympics are coming to Paris soon and I hope to have some kind of role, the thing that springs to mind is the golf, actually. And it's not a regret because I couldn't do anything about it, that, in TV land these days, if your TV station has the rights to an event, then you get to work on the event. You don't get to just pick and choose what you do, of course. And sadly for me, beIN Sports didn't have the rights to the Ryder Cup. And I loved the Ryder Cup, the golf competition. And when it was in Paris recently, Europe against the US in Paris, it was amazing. The atmosphere was fantastic, and I had to watch it from afar and not be able to cover it. And that was something which I was like, oh God, I'd love to be on air for this. I'd love to be broadcasting from that event because it was wonderful. And of course, sorry guys, but Europe won, and so it made it even better. So that was something, if I could do some Ryder Cup golf, yeah, that would tick a lot of boxes for me.
Go ahead. Are you going to tell him that you went to the Ryder Cup and try and rub it in
on
him?
Well, no, I'm sure Darren was there. But yeah, no, I did. And I will say, as someone who didn't grow up as a huge golf fan, I played a bit of golf and stuff, but it wasn't something I was not turning on the TV to watch golf.
Yeah.
I think the Ryder Cup stood out to me as one of the greatest sporting events I've attended.
Right. I'm the same. I agree. I don't play golf, particularly. I'm really rubbish, so hardly ever play. And I don't, apart from the majors, I don't watch golf on TV. But yeah, the Ryder Cup gets me every time. I guess it's the team thing, and seeing those guys who week after week are on their own, they're battling against everybody else. It's a tough world out there. And the recent Netflix series, was it Full Swing? I thought it was brilliant for that, to see wow, these guys, it's such a harsh world out there at the top of golf, to see them play as a team, and really get into it and really enjoy it, and want to be, especially, between the Americans and the Europeans, lots of them are really good friends on the circuit, but then suddenly it's like, it's us against them now, it's you against me. And I really love that. I thrive on that, on that kind of atmosphere. So, yeah, I get what you're saying. I really enjoy watching that as well.
So I was going to try and pick your brain a little bit about a topic that we covered a lot almost probably now a year ago in the Super League, and the formation of it. But we'll leave that for another day, because I'm sure we can all just bash the Super League, for hours. But for me, I guess a fun one to end on for me would be, you've covered a lot of World Cups in France for French media. How open are you about, are you still supporting England in the broadcasting booth there and kind of rubbing it in with your fellow commentators, or are you kind of just silently sitting there? I mean, probably I would assume silently, because England haven't had as much success what's your support level like now that you've been living there for so long, and you've obviously been a voice of French
that's
football?
a really good question, and it does bring back to mind lots of memories quickly, because sure, I'm the English guy, so when I'm on air, 9 times out of 10 that doesn't come into play, because I'm talking about Champions League football, or I'm presenting Wimbledon, for example, on the tennis front. So it's not like a thing, I mean, everyone knows who I am and where I come from, but of course it is a thing when I'm talking about France against England. At the last World Cup, that was the quarterfinal, of course. I was there in Qatar. I was in the stadium and I was presenting the game, so and there you do feel very lonely. You are the only guy on the whole of our team here, of course, who wants England to win. And as a French broadcaster, I also knew that it wouldn't be good business for my company if England knocked France out. We want France to go to the final because it's good for viewing figures, of course. So it was kind of, I love those moments, because I encourage my my colleagues to rib me about that, to get stuck in, and it means I can do the same. And we have a lot of fun on air. It gives us a real edge, because suddenly, you really are defending something that you care about, And sometimes people make the mistake, French people make the mistake of saying to me, well, Darren, you've been in France for 30 years now, who are you going to support between France and England? I'm like, are you serious? Come on. I mean, I'm the English guy. Of course I'm for England, I mean, I said to French guys, if you'd been living in London for 30 years, would you suddenly change your allegiance, Would you suddenly sing God Save the King instead of La Marseillaise? Of course not, You're always going to be for your home country. But of course, at the same time, guys, I do it with... I play up to it. I lean into it. I play the the chauvinistic card as if it's going to be the end of the world if England lose. Whereas in reality, of course, you can't be a huge patriot and chauvinistic guy if you've been living in a different country more than half your life by choice. Of course, I want England to win, but really, I'm so used to England not winning, it doesn't really do much to me anymore these days. And as soon as England are out, yes, I'm for France. After that, only after that, but then I'm for France. So what happened the last time in the quarterfinal when England, really might have knocked France out? We played a really good game. But at the end of it, of course, they were all taking the mickey out of me. They were ribbing me ceaselessly, and of course, it was fun, and I enjoyed it. I find all this kind of thing. This is something that we have thanks to on my station. We also have an Argentine guy, and I think it's fun. Yeah.
Oh, he
Of
must
course,
have
oh
had
my
a fun
God,
few
it's
weeks.
the best time of his life, And he's a former football player. He used to play for PSG back in the day, Omar de Fonseca. He wasn't a great football player, but he was a fantastic pundit and a brilliant friend of ours here. So I think that's great, and it brings colour and it brings excitement and fun to the show. So that's not a problem. But I do remember another funny story about England and the football team is before the last Euro, which was in England, of course, and they'd put it back a year because of COVID. But so it was Euro 20s, and they played it in Euro 2020. They played it in 2021, didn't they? And again, my station was broadcasting every game, so we did a big promo thing just before the beginning of the tournament, and I was one of the guys being interviewed with Arsene Wenger about, who we thought were going to do well in the tournament. And Arsene, of course, being still living in London at the time, was asked about England. And to be honest, guys, basically we're doing this promo thing, with lots of newspapers and magazines over here in France. And I found it had been a little bit low key up to now. So I was trying to find a way to, add a little bit of spice to the whole conversation. I'm looking for a punchline here, a headline, an angle. And Arsene Wenger starts saying, well, I do think that the England team is looking very good. I give them a very good chance of doing well at the Euros. So I butted in. I thought, here's my chance, So I cut him off. I said, so Arsene, I'm sorry. I said, listen, I know you've been in England a long time, but Arsene, I don't know what you've been putting in your Earl Grey over there in recent days. Let me just remind you that England, hasn't won a soccer tournament since 1966, Arsene. Every time we go in there saying we're going to do well, every time we come home with our, tail between our legs, crying about we'll do better next time. So I said, I'll tell you what, Arsene, you may think that England are going to do well. I am so confident that we will not win it, that if ever, I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. If England win the European Championships, I will have my hair shaved off on the set straight after the final, And of course, that guy, it was funny. We laughed, and they picked it up and ran with that a little bit over here. Darren Tulett's going to do this if England win. Imagine a few weeks later, England are in the final, and I'm like, I'm going to lose my hair.
Were they trimmers
with a full head of hair? These things matter, And all my
were there trimmers there in case
England
won?
Oh my God, yes, exactly. The hairdresser here had got the trimmers out, and they'd worked out, because of course England were winning in that game, and they'd worked it all out, the whole choreography. At the end of the game, they were going to take it in turns with the trimmer. Everybody was going to shave off a little bit, then hand it down the line. There's going to be a whole line of people queuing up to shave my hair off. I mean, with hindsight, it would have been hilarious. But of course, England didn't bloody win.
I don't believe you. I'm sure your heart rate didn't even rise. You knew who you were supporting at the end of the day. weren't even breaking a sweat.
Come on, Italy. Oh dear.
Well, I guess on that note, it's been great talking to you about your career and football, and so thank you so much for being really generous with your time, and maybe we can have you back on again in the future with obviously a Champions League final or a European, the Euros next summer and stuff coming up.
Euros absolutely.
Have you on again.
Well, thank you, Frank. Thank you, Edward. It's fun talking to you guys.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks so much. You're good.